Good evening, everyone, and welcome to night 2 of the 2024 REC Foundation Coach Training Summit. I am joined here tonight by our coach training team. I will introduce everyone. My name is Brandy Bollinger, and I am a Senior Program Support Manager at the REC Foundation. My job is supporting the amazing regional support managers and coaches like yourself throughout the season.
And my name is Emily Bruning, and I am located in Indiana, and I am the Regional Support Manager for Coaches and Event Partners in Indiana.
My name's Bill Cahill. I am located in Southern California, and I'm here to support teams and event partners in Southern California and Hawaii.
Both of us are muted, so
there you go, Ulrika.
Both of us are muted, but I was just going to say that Randy is taking the evening off, and I am Ulrika Peroni, and I am the Regional Support Manager for Florida.
Hey, everybody. I'm Pat Price. I live in Central Kentucky, but my region is definitely Kentucky. We also have Ohio and East and West Pennsylvania, so I'm looking forward to talking to you guys.
Hey everyone, my name's Bailey. I'm the GDC engineer here at Vector Robotics.
Awesome. So throughout the night tonight, we do have our Q&A form open. We have included the link to it on the Robot Events page, as well as there'll be a QR code in the top left corner of your screen throughout the night tonight. You can feel free to scan that and submit your questions on that form. We'll be answering all of those questions at the end of the presentations tonight. And after the presentations are done, we will be sending out a PD certificate and a resource guide for you that will include all of the links that we've talked about and all of the resources that we're covering. Throughout the presentation tonight, you may see some QR codes in the presentation. Scanning these will get you to some of the resources that we are discussing. Here is that QR code for you. We would encourage you to fill out the questions, even if you think of something that might not be related to tonight's presentation, because we will be sending these questions to your regional support manager at the end of the presentations. And if you don't get your answer from us, we'll make sure that you get it from them. So if you joined us last night, you learned about the VexIQ robotics competition game, how it was designed, and how the GDC is going about making sure that that game is competitive for the whole entire season. We learned about some great tips for notebooking for teams and what you should kind of be putting in your notebooks to take it to that exemplary level. We shared some coach training resources also. All of these videos are posted on the REC Foundation YouTube channel for you to view. Now tonight, Bailey will be joining us again for a recap of the VEX V5 robotics competition and some of the upcoming exciting news for the VEX V5 robotics competition. And then Pat and I will be sharing some ideas for strategic design with you. The REC Foundation hosts all of the VEX robotics competition programs in addition to a lot of aerial drone competition programs, and all of our programs that we do are student-centered. For you, the coaches, this means that you are the ones there guiding your students, encouraging your students, sharing resources with them, but they're the ones that are designing, programming, prototyping, building, coming up with all of the ideas for their robot. This allows them to take part in that engineering design process and kind of increase their skills as they go along. The REC Foundation thinks that being part of a team will teach students how to overcome failure, persevere, and emerge confident in their skills as they enter the workforce. If you do not know who your regional support manager is and you live in the United States, you can visit the Robotics. Oh my goodness sakes. You can visit robotevents.com/support and find out who your regional support manager is. This is who you'll reach out to if you have any questions about coaching or events. If you're joining us internationally, you also have a regional support manager who is glad to help you. So go ahead and visit that website. Again, that's robotevents.com/support to find out who your regional support manager is. Now get ready to turn it over to Bailey for some information on the VEX V5 robotics competition. But again, if you have any questions at all, whether it's for Bailey, the game design committee, for the coach training team, or your regional support manager, please make sure that you're scanning that QR code to submit your questions. And now, Bailey, I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. All right, everybody. Hello, my name is Bailey. I am the VEX Robotics GDC engineer. I've been here since 2022 full-time. Before that, I started here as a mechanical engineering intern in 2017. I've worked on just about every single product line we have here at VEX. However, my favorite obviously is the games. I'm born and raised in Connecticut, where I was a V5 alumni, and I also started for VEX IQ coaches when I was in high school, or I coached and started for VEX IQ teams when I was in high school and college. And just a little fun fact about myself, a little VEX-related fun fact, my favorite game of all time is Skyrise, the 2014-2015 V5 RC competition. And then over in the bottom right-hand corner of the slide there, that's my first ever VEX competition robot I ever built, and that was for the game Stack Attack. Okay, so just a quick agenda going over some of the things we're going to talk about today before I get to an open floor for some of your questions. Kind of going to overview the game that we're playing this year, High Stakes. Try not to touch too long on reviewing the game. You guys have probably seen a bajillion times by now. We're going to talk a little bit about the field tour video and some of the engineering that goes on in the back end for designing a field. I'm going to touch upon a little bit of the philosophy we use as a game design committee when we're coming up with our games. We had a fun topic talked about in one of our Q&A topics yesterday that I'm going to kind of dive into a little bit more because it relates a little bit more to V5 and how we develop how to score a game. We're going to talk about some hero bots, and then, like I said, we're going to get to the open floor question segment. So this is High Stakes. This is the updated top-down view of High Stakes. As I'm sure some of you guys know, we adjusted the field a little bit more than you'd normally expect in a manual update a couple weeks ago, or it was last week, I guess. So the new tape lines are adjusted, some new corner definitions, and that seems like we've taken a lot of risk, or we're making a lot of changes that normally would not have been put into place in past seasons, or we were a little bit reserved about making changes like that in past seasons. I'm going to talk a little bit more about why we made some of the decisions we've made for some of these updates a little bit later on in the video when we talk about some of the philosophy behind some of the decisions and motivations behind why we make some of these updates. But this is High Stakes. Obviously, we have that big element in the center of the field. That's super awesome. I'm super excited to see how that progresses throughout the course of the season. I know it's been a hot topic of discussion with climbing. Again, we're gonna touch upon that a little bit later in the video. One of the things that I highly encourage you guys to go check out are the field tour videos. In this one, especially with the V5 video, I kind of go into depth in that video, kind of describing some of the intricacies of the field, some pro tips on assembly and disassembly and things like that, and kind of just get up and close, give you some little background on the field and the engineering behind it, and give you a little up and close tour. One of the things I talk about in that video that might be pertinent to some of you guys is some of the things that we set out on the engineering side of game design for goals to work on based on some of the feedback we've gotten from coaches like you and event partners in the past couple of years. So we heard you guys. We know that the game fields as far as disassembly, transport, storage has not always been something that's been the easiest thing in the world to figure out. So we set out with three main goals for the field construction this year for High Stakes. We wanted generally a simple construction with thoughtful disassembly and durable parts. We didn't want fields breaking in normal match play. We wanted it to be able such that you weren't spending hours disassembling the field if you needed to clear room in a classroom, or if you were an event partner disassembling an event, things like that. simple construction. All of the nuts and everything as far as hardware on the field goes, it's super easy. Basically 3 or 4 screw lengths, if I remember correctly, so you're not mix and matching hardware as much. Most of the nuts have nut pockets, so you don't need a wrench in most cases to assemble the field. Kind of just little details we're working to make all the user experiences better when we're interacting with the game field. One of the additional things we did this past year was take the under tile field plates out of the game kit and make them their own individual SKU available for sale in addition to the game kit. This was motivated by a couple main factors. We started realizing that, especially after Over Under, where that game had 11 of these under the tile field plates, that is very likely, if you've been coaching or an event partner for longer than 2 or 3 years at this point, you likely have a pretty large stockpile of these parts. You probably don't need to keep being sent these parts every year. They're heavy metal plates. Many cases, they required an extra box in shipping. So we're able to take that extra box back out of the game kit to make it easier to get to your hands. And you're hopefully not paying as much in shipping costs. I know that is a very large, very popular concern with the game kits. And I just want to make it clear that we are aware of this concern, and we're trying to find ways to make it easier for us to get you these game kits. Based on some of the feedback we've gotten from both coaches and event partners, as of right now, this is something we're going to continue to plan on doing for the future. So these plates will not be included in game kits moving forward, but we will always allow, similar to how we have on the high stakes page on vexrobotics.com right now, a drop-down box option. Click that box if you need these plates still, if you don't have any, and they'll get added into your cart as well. So we have the option to ship these or not ship these if you do or do not need them. It's really enabled us to kind of, the other thing that this is allowing us to do is kind of take budget back out of what our normal game kit budget is. And that enables us to create cooler, more in-depth, larger game elements on the field. All right, so kind of we're going to get into a little bit of the nitty-gritty stuff, a little bit of the things that probably a lot of you guys want to hear about. And this is going to be opening up a little bit more of the black box that is the game design committee. So I touched upon this a little bit yesterday if you guys were here for my presentation yesterday, but this is our main game design philosophy as a GDC. This is what we use to drive almost every decision that we make. So on the game design committee, we have 4 main stakeholder positions that we're kind of grouped into amongst ourselves, and that be teams, which would be coaches or competitors, former students, etc., event partners, referees and volunteers, and spectators. So all of these stakeholders have equal power, equal decision-making, equal debate power, what you may have on the committee, and we have equal representation on the committee. So in any decision that we make, whether we're designing a new game, whether we're trying to figure out how to answer a Q&A, we take every one of these stakeholder perspectives into account to see how any decision we make will positively and or negatively influence one of these stakeholder positions. So kind of bouncing onto, actually, we'll go back one slide still. This was a little bit, I'll touch upon it in 2 slides from now, but you can kind of see how and why we use these stakeholder positions in some of the decisions on the manual updates we've made this year. I'd say the biggest one is the corner goal redefinition process and why we changed the tape lines and things like that. A lot of that was driven by the referees and volunteers having a very negative experience trying to score the game and trying to fairly referee the game. When we have that issue, it trickles down and creates a negative event experience for many of the people participating in an event. When that happens, we identify that as multiple key stakeholders are affected by something going on. That's something we immediately need to figure out and change. So kind of diving in a little bit more, one of the fun questions I got yesterday in the IQ part of this presentation that I felt was a really cool question and kind of wanted to dive into it a little bit more was, how do we determine how to score and what scoring values are assigned to things? So this is a really fun exercise that we do as a GDC. So I'm kind of dive into it. This is only one way we are able to kind of develop scoring values, but generally this one is one of the more reliable methods we use, and is actually the method we use to develop most of the scoring for high stakes. So what we do is we generate a list of scoring scenarios or range of scoring scenarios. What that is we're basically taking snapshots of the final resting place of a field at the end of a match. So if you look over on the right here, I have two example scoring scenarios where basically the left-hand side of those tables are describing scoring scenarios. How many total rings are scored, who they're scored for, is anybody climbed, who won autonomous, things like that. We take that scoring scenario and we do a very simple vibe check. Who do we think, based on those two scoring scenarios, quote unquote, won? What of those two scoring scenarios should have a higher point value? We take a very varying range of varying different scoring scenarios, whether it be absolute blowouts or super close, tight-knit battles, to see how do we generate scoring values that make sure all of these scenarios and these vibe checks that we create to say red should beat blue in this scenario, how do we create scoring values that make all of these true? That's where we get a little bit into the math side of things. It's actually a quite fun linear algebra matrix problem where we're doing some matrix math to generate values in this basically systems of equations to make sure that if we assign point values to all of these variables, all of these scoring scenarios match what we felt like should win. And that's what we did this year for high stakes. A lot of concern has been brought forward towards our end and questions about the climbing values and the climbing score that does not feel incentivized. So one of the reasons we as a GDC so far have not felt like we need to adjust that is a little bit of, we feel like the season hasn't progressed enough yet. And that's something we're going to talk about a little bit in my next slide, which is, when do we fix something? So kind of also based a little bit on a question we received yesterday. When does the GDC decide that an issue crosses the level to need an adjustment? When do we decide, hey, maybe we should make that more valuable in points? One of the biggest influences of change for us is actual match play. For example, the Minnesota Signature event this year was super influential in giving us a lot of feedback that we use to create version 2.0 of the game manual. We elicit feedback from referees, participants, coaches, event partners, etc. And we use all that information to kind of get a general vibe of those stakeholder experiences that we talked about earlier. Manual 2.0 did a pretty large update, like we talked about a couple minutes ago, on those corner definitions and the modifier definitions. So the issue was that referees were having a hard time scoring or determining whether or not a mobile goal was placed in a corner. When that happened, the competitor experience is devalued, because now you're witnessing a competitor, as a competitor, referees having internal debates amongst themselves. When that happens, that creates anticipation, suspense between the two alliances. Obviously, when that happens, you're going to have heartbreak on one side and elation on the other. That can lead to negative experiences or feels bad moments, like we call them sometimes. So we want to minimize those things. But on the flip side of that, a lot of times when we're working to improve one stakeholder experience, we have to make sure we're balancing the negative effects that that might have on others. So the corner redefinition, for example, was a very, very long conversation that we had amongst ourselves to determine what the best way to figure this out was. We went through permutations of different updates. This was not our first idea, I promise you that. And we want to make sure that any change that we make positively affects one stakeholder and doesn't totally tarnish the experience of another. And that, in many ways is why many times you'll see Q&As will sit unanswered for quite some time. I understand personally why that can be frustrating. I'm a robotics competitor in other competition formats and things like that. So I am on the side of the competitor having to kind of reach out and try and grasp what that true definition is out of the game manual, trying to ask these questions, garner true intent. But on the flip side of it, being in the position we're in on the GDC, whenever we create or whenever we answer questions in the Q&A, many times those answers create change or influence these stakeholder experiences in and of themselves. So we have to balance whenever we make an answer into the Q&A, we have to work through all of the trickle-down effects that that answer might have on other gameplay mechanics, on other scoring values, on strategy decisions, on affecting the health of the competition as a whole and not just in this one specific scenario that the question brings up. So a lot of the times when we have long, drawn-out Q&As, it's not that we don't want to fix something, it's we want to make sure we're fixing it the right way. And sometimes, unfortunately, that takes time for us to develop the correct answer that doesn't, unfortunately, tarnish the experience even more. That's a little bit about the back end of the GDC. I'm sure that's going to instigate some questions, so I won't elaborate too much farther. We're going to instead dive into the HeroBot and some of the constraints and ideas we use here at Vex Robotics to help influence the HeroBot design and why we do some of the things we do with the HeroBot. So talking about the HeroBot really has one main goal, and it's a learning opportunity for emerging students and teams. We want it to be an approachable robot design that makes it super easy for students to achieve that first milestone, which is their first completed robot. That first completed robot milestone is arguably, and I'm sure many of you coaches can attest to this too, the most elated, jaw-dropping, excited moment a student can experience in robotics. It is generally like my favorite part about coaching, seeing that eyes go wide as soon as it starts moving the first time. The HeroBot is a really awesome way to get to that milestone really fast. It inspires new individual ideas. It's generally a simple concept that's able to be built upon with more mechanisms, more complicated ideas that the students can integrate into the already existing design. Specifically for V5, one of the things that we might do slightly differently some years is use the HeroBot to create innovative and or different mechanisms than one might expect a robot to use. The reason we do this is, as I'm sure many of you know, VRC or V5RC is very meta-driven. So the design meta per se varies throughout a season. And one thing we don't want to do as the Vex engineering team is drive that meta. So many times we'll release the HeroBot with a little bit of a meta-breaking design, but it's still very capable of scoring points. And that is an absolute must constraint that we have with the HeroBot. The HeroBot design must actively contribute to an alliance, whether that be actually scoring points or whether that be enabling your partner to increase their point ceiling. So no matter what the HeroBot's capabilities are, it will always be positively influential on a match and almost never negatively influential. One of the other things we've done with the HeroBot in the past couple of years is started to use this as an opportunity for students to integrate sensors and programming. One of the things that we have available with the HeroBot is it's integrated into Vex VR Skills online. And Vex VR Skills is basically a virtual playground where we have a HeroBot with sensors already built onto it that you can virtually program online on a Vex field, and you can basically run a robot skills match simulated online with your own individual programming. And that allows you to really easily take some more complicated programming techniques, apply them to Vex Skills VR, learn how to program with sensors, then you take that censored HeroBot out of VexCode VR, replicate it in reality, and now you have a really awesome path to integrate sensors and more advanced programming into the students' learning activities with their competition robot. And as I'm sure many of you know, the HeroBot will always be buildable out of the VEX V5 competition starter kit. So that's kind of all I've got as far as me talking to you guys. I get a little winded. I'm not going to go too much longer with me talking down to you guys. So I'm going to open it up. Let's ask some questions, and I'm here to answer whatever you guys got.
Awesome. Thanks, Bailey. All right, we got a couple of good ones.
I'm ready.
So you talked a little bit about how the GDC goes about like initial scoring and then like deciding whether or not the changes need to be made. How do you guys go about deciding when to change rules for the VEX Robotics World Championship, and when do you make that decision?
Sure. So one of the things that we always take into account when we're deciding what to do for the VEX Robotics World Championship is we have to take into account the fact that the event regional championships for all of these international events or international regions are taking place at very different times than a lot of the more US-based event regional championships are. So that puts a little bit of a time constraint on us on when we are actually able to determine some of these changes we need to implement for either event regional championships or, like you said, for VEX Worlds. So for event regional championships, if we're to make any changes for those are mainly driven by the signature events that are going to happen over the next couple of weeks. So we've already seen the Minnesota signature event. That created a lot of influence on our version 2.0 of the manual. The next version, main update versions of the manual are going to be driven by a lot by the signature events and the higher level local events that are happening going on in the next couple of weeks. Those events are going to drive a lot of the changes that we then make to event regional championships. On the flip side of that, the event regional championships, any gameplay changes we can see based on those will happen influencing the VEX Robotics World Championship. I think if you go back and look at the over-under season and some of the updates we made over the course of the over-under season, you can kind of follow that logical path through seeing how the meta shifted between some of the early signature events to mid-season into event regional championships, and how a lot of our gameplay updates and manual updates followed through with that shifting meta as far as match loading, bowling, things like that. And you can truly kind of follow through how we come to those conclusions. And if you actually look at the schedule of the dates that we have for our manual updates, it kind of follows that same progression where we have the very early season update. It comes right after the Minnesota signature event. Then we have a couple of updates staggered out through the late October through December. Those are going to be driven by mostly the signature events that are happening around that time. And then we're going to start getting into the event regional championship stuff like I talked about.
So do you anticipate seeing some scoring increases because of those signature events, or
Sure.
between now and event region championships?
Sure. Personally, I think it's a little bit early in the season to kind of give a concrete answer on that. As a GDC, we've talked about this because it's generally one of our main points of feedback right now is we're getting a lot of concerns with where scoring is at. I can say because we were involved with some of this back-end math that I talked about earlier in the presentation, that we actually feel that scoring in its current state is a pretty healthy situation. And we're expecting the game to continue to evolve over the next couple of months. And we predict that the gameplay will shift organically towards that scoring situation that it's at currently actually being more appropriate for the way the game is playing. Obviously, if that changes over the next couple of weeks, we have multiple scheduled manual updates that will enable us to kind of tweak that and play with that. And we have the next couple of months to be able to do that before our international event regional championships.
So for all of these coaches and students that are asking, like, why aren't you guys updating the scoring? What advice would you give to them to have them start moving forward with their season without the scoring increase?
Sure. I think right now, my suggestion would be take it event to event. Obviously, the overlying overhead question of, is this going to change in 6 weeks? That is something, sure, you're going to have a little bit of anxiety about. but I focus on getting to your next event first, right? I think we're still in a super early season for most VEX teams. We're still working in local qualifier events. Right now, I can tell you I don't foresee scoring changes specifically related to climbing, at least for the next couple of weeks, if not a month or two. So I think right now we're in a pretty healthy slate that you can expect to be pretty stagnant on most of the scoring stuff for the next couple of weeks. And we're going to evaluate based on the next couple of weeks events if we need to change anything. But I just think we're too early in the season to commit to any changes like that right now.
So basically what I'm hearing is people should just keep building cool robots and playing the game and taking it match to match as well as they can.
Yeah, I think so. Right now, I think one of the things important to understand is that we've already made a lot of impactful changes to gameplay in version 2.0 of the game manual. I think I would recommend teams focus on how that changes what you're doing and why those changes were made to help maybe influence some of the gameplay decisions and strategies you're using towards the match. Because I want to explain that a lot of the decisions we make are because of things we see in match play, because of things that we maybe did or did not expect to happen. And some of the intent we have with the game, we're going to tweak and play with it a little bit until we start to see that gameplay start driving towards what we intended the game to play like. And currently, with the way things are going, I think a lot of the changes in Manual 2.0 are going to drive that change towards what we were expecting to see.
Awesome. All right. I got a cool one for you. I didn't expect to see this question, but I think it's super cool. All right. We have a student whose literal life goal is to end up on the VEX Game Design Committee or GDC. They want to know, what does the career path look like to end up there? And like, is that even a possibility? Like, how does somebody end up on the GDC?
Yeah, sure. I can talk a little bit about how I got to where I'm at. I took a little bit of an interesting path to get to where I'm at right now. I'm actually a college dropout, so I don't have a degree, but I would call myself what I would say is an experiential learner. So one of the things that I valued a lot in my experience was I spent a lot of the time in college, when I was in college, working as an intern here at VEX Robotics. And it doesn't necessarily have to be at VEX Robotics, but one of the things that I would recommend any VEX student do if they want to stay involved in competitive robotics in the future, whether that be in college, et cetera, or even just professional advice in general, get experience, get the experiential learning early. So try to find internships, try to get involved, find a way to tip your toes in as early as possible. I think my experience here at VEX Robotics as a college intern enabled me to be in the position I'm at today because I have a unique skill set of being so familiar with VEX Robotics and a lot of its competitions and a lot of its parts and things like that, but also having that experiential learning, being on a team, having competitive experience. I personally have 12 years of competitive robotics experience, which is almost half my life at this point. So almost half my life spent on this earth has been somewhat involved with competitive robotics. So my advice is, if that's truly where your heart's at, keep with it. Find a way to stay involved. But don't be disappointed if the end goal actually shifts a little bit towards being an influential coach or an influential event partner. I have a very unique privilege of being able to impact so many people with my job, but there's other ways to impact the competition, to impact the kids, to find ways to stay involved with VEX. Be a coach, volunteer at events, run your own events as an event partner. There's other ways than just the GDC.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a coach since the fall of 2007. So I'm coming up on almost 19 years, 20 years being a coach. And like, I went to school for elementary education. Like, I never would have saw myself doing this, like working at the REC Foundation and like, teaching robotics coaches every single day for a career. So, I mean, if you're in high school right now, or maybe in college and you have a dream, totally go after it. And you never know, your path might take you there. So,
yeah, keep with it.
All right. Yeah, heck yeah. All right, so we've got a couple of more questions, but for our viewers that we have out there, keep those questions coming in. If you have questions specifically for Bailey, we've got him here for about the next 15 minutes or so. So make sure that you submit those questions.
Yeah.
All right, so I have a coach who's wondering, they're kind of new to this and they have a lot of new students on their team. Should they start with the hero bot to learn the basics? Should they start with a claw bot for this year's game? Does it really matter how you start to get introduced, or is there a method to the madness?
Sure. I think if you ask any of these coaches on the forum right now that may be more experienced or whatnot, you'll get a lot of varying answers. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. From personal experience from when I was a coach, a lot of the reasons why I love the hero bot so much is because it enabled my job as a coach to become 1,000, if not 1,000,000 times easier. When I was coaching IQ teams, we were super, what's the word I'm looking for? Time constrained, sorry. We only met about once a week for 1 to 2 hours, depending on the day. So we were really not getting a lot of meeting time between events, before events, etc. So one of the things I had all of my students do is they would all build a hero bot before their first event. So their first event that they went to every year, they always had a hero bot built exactly by the instructions. That got them used to the game. It got them used to gameplay, understanding strategy, understanding how to score points, when to score points, etc. Kind of getting them just involved, getting all of this information overload digested and processed. Once they complete that first event, I let them come home and take the hero bot. And like we said in my slide earlier, the hero bot's built to be built upon. So you take some of these ideas from your initial first event with the hero bot, you add in some additional mechanisms, some tweaks. You change the size of it. Maybe you simply make a simple change as far as the changing traction wheels to omni wheels. It can be literally as simple as that, and that can totally change the course of robots competition season. But those simple changes are influenced by the students, and it gives them that next milestone that we talk about to, instead of just creating that first robot, now they're iterating on it and making better and climbing that staircase of milestones. The hero bot's a really awesome progression on getting to those milestones really fast, especially if you're time constrained or material constrained, things like that.
I think it's great advice. All right. So one of the things that we discussed yesterday was the changes in the size to the IQ bot. This year's IQ bots can be absolutely massive.
Yeah.
Do you expect to see any changes for the V5 robots coming like that soon?
Yeah, I mean, we took a little bit of a change this year on how we approached expansion. It was a mixed bag of reception at the beginning of the season. I can tell you one of the reasons why we felt we had to make this change in how we approached expansion was a simple concern about travel lanes around the ladder for the high stakes field this year. We felt that we had to limit expansion so that we didn't have any lockdown wall bot scenarios going on using the ladder to kind of block off parts of the field. So we kind of had a little bit of a different expansion rule for V5 this year. It wasn't quite as extreme of a change for IQ. I think we can expect some similar a similar set of expansion rule set moving forward in the V5 robotics competition. The only thing I might expect would be some minor verbiage changes, so definition changes. If you'll notice, we've tweaked a lot of the graphics in the game manual this year to help understand our intent a little bit better. So I think the intent will stay the same. The way we're defining our intent and presenting the information might vary a little bit based on, again, feedback from students, coaches, event partners on trying to understand exactly what our intent is with expansion.
Cool. All right. All right, perfect. Oh, here's a cool one. Is there a way that old field parts can game elements can be recycled or sent back to VEX?
Sure. So this is something that in the past couple of years we've started to look at a little bit on the game design engineering side of things with the one single-use plastic and things like that. Many of the game pieces that you'll see used in Vex Robotics games actually have recycling logos embossed on them, and that's for good reason. It's because they are recyclable. So if you have game pieces at the end of the year that you don't want, don't need, they're recyclable. Instead of sending them back to us, one of my favorite methods I've heard to recycle old game pieces, contact local preschools, contact local daycare centers, see if they might want a bunch of random balls, toys, things like that for kids to play with. Schools, PE teachers, things like that. You might be able to recycle these game pieces in a fun way that might not seem immediately obvious to you. We currently don't have a send back process or a recycling process through us. And that's simply because logistics. There are recycling centers nationwide that will take recyclable plastics, especially in bulk. And I'd recommend you look to see who might be able to take those locally for you. It's going to save you and Vex a little bit of money on the shipping and the processing and the time involved in that. Yeah, Pat just brought up an even awesome point in our little side chat here for the stream. Pet adoption, humane societies, local pounds and things like that. Pets love Vex game pieces too. So I would try and get creative as far as finding ways to recycle these games locally before we start worrying about throwing them into the dumpster.
That's an excellent idea. As a former preschool teacher myself, I think it's an awesome idea, especially when they're, like you said, blocks and balls and things. Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. We got a couple more minutes here. Got one for you. You talked a little bit earlier about the meta of the game and about how the meta changes. I have a question. What is the meta? How is the meta determined and how does it change?
Sure. It's kind of an interesting question. Completely honest, I think if you ask one of your students to explain the meta and how it changes, they might be able to give you a better answer than I would be able to. So I'd encourage you to talk to some of your students, especially some of the ones that have been around for a couple of years, see what they have to say about the meta and why it shifts. I would personally have to say one of the big reasons why Vex Robotics, the V5 robotics competition specifically, has an evolving meta is because of the length of the season. Contrary to other robotics competitions that are similar to Vex, Vex operates on almost a year-long season. Actually, it is a year-long season, right? Because we released the new game minutes after the last match of the previous game was played. So because that opportunity for the year-long season, we have that opportunity for the year-long season, almost no teams are building one robot anymore. So teams will build one robot, bring it to a competition, and the magic of Vex is because it's easy to build a robot, it's easy to disassemble and rebuild a robot. So many teams will spend the season, if they go to 6 or 7 events, they'll have 6 or 7 different robots because they're tweaking them event to event. You might get 3 or 4 events into a season, you go to that 5th event and you see an awesome mechanism on another robot that's better than your robot. And you look at it and you're like, man, I really love my design, but that's a cool idea. It's performing better. Why don't we try and take that idea and integrate it into our robot? Now you have a new robot. You're taking ideas from other people, and that's how you have, that's where you create that meta shift. And that meta shift starts to happen when those groups of people trying to take ideas and integrate them into their robot start to navigate towards one idea, because that one idea propagates really easily. If somebody starts copying that idea, that means somebody else is very likely going to see that robot and copy the idea again. So it almost creates this family tree-esque of meta convergence out. That creates a lot of the gameplay shifts that you see. We talked a little bit about over-under. I think over-under is a great example of seeing the meta shift over the course of the season. Beginning of the season, Minnesota signature event, things like that. We had these raising match loaders that, trying to get the tri-balls as many over the other side of the field as possible, as quick as possible. Season progressed, we start to see teams are stealing those game pieces. We want to start starving game pieces to make sure that I have more access to game pieces than my opponent does. So we start to see game piece control come into play a little bit more. Instead of handling all the game pieces at the beginning of the match, teams are starting to slowly bring these game pieces to the other side of the field to make sure I'm maintaining control of it and not giving my opponent opportunity. So a lot of these meta shifts are simply a byproduct of the learning process, right? Because as students are learning, as they're gaining more information, as they're understanding things better, they're going to want to get better. And the best way to get better sometimes is to take ideas and copy them. I compete personally in robotics competitions myself, and I guarantee you Brandy is going to bring this up in her strategic design presentation later. One of my favorite quotes in competitive robotics is "steal from the best, invent the rest." So that leads a lot to these meta shifts of teams are taking ideas, implementing themselves, and implementing those ideas into their own robots and creating this meta towards everyone driving to similar ideas. It's not necessarily the best thing in the world. It's not necessarily a bad thing either, but it is an interesting part of the VEX Robotics competition, V5 Robotics competition, that is quite unique compared to many other competitions.
But I mean, if we look at things in the world, design convergence is a real thing. Every car has round wheels because round wheels work,
yeah, I mean,
right?
Absolutely. I think your latest Samsung Galaxy phones look more like iPhones than they do, you know, when they were designed 5-6 years ago. So we're going to start to see design convergence everywhere. It literally exists everywhere in the world for good reason.
All right, we have time for 2 more questions. All
Sure.
right. So question number 1, is VEX planning on ever selling single game pieces or single parts in the future? This was brought up at the EP Summit this year.
Yeah, so this was brought up at the EP Summit this year, and we kind of took that feedback. I don't have much news for you other than the fact that, yes, VEX will be selling individual game pieces. Specifically for high stakes, we're working to get the mobile goals available for sale in individual quantities, so you won't need to buy the full $589 field kit just to get an extra mobile goal. If you're a teacher, a team needs an extra mobile goal to practice, things like that, or just have a spare around, we'll be able to sell those individually, hopefully within the next couple of weeks, if not months. But that is something we have on the plate. I'm excited because that's going to open us up to being able to do this in the future, being able to kind of bridge this gap of the situation of wanting more game pieces, wanting replacement parts, but not wanting to commit the full almost $600 plus shipping to a new game kit. So I think I talked about this a little bit at the EP Summit, how VEX robotics competition as a whole is in a really interesting scale point right now, where logistically speaking, from the ordering standpoint, we need to make sure whenever we're ordering and preparing to sell a new product, that we can guarantee that whatever we buy is going to be able to be sold, so it's not a sunk cost. That's especially hard in a product that will forever and always have a maximum lifespan of 12 months. So it's really a logistical issue of projecting how many we would sell, projecting whether or not it's a worthwhile business venture. And we evaluated it after some feedback at the EP Summit. We looked at things. We think this is a point now where we can start to work to allow ourselves to be able to sell these moving forward. So that's an awesome situation to be in. VEX is growing. We have more teams, more events than we've had in ever, basically. And that's enabling us to do these awesome things on the logistical side of keeping parts in stock and getting you guys what you need as coaches and event partners and participants in our program.
Awesome. So we got about 5-ish minutes left here. The last question that I have for you is, if someone has either a question about the actual game or maybe some feedback that they want to give to improve said game, how do they communicate that to the GDC? You talked about how you guys are taking into consideration everyone's opinion. How do you share it?
Yeah, it's one of the things that we as a GDC have, we took it upon ourselves in the past couple of months to try and make it a goal of ours to elicit more feedback, spend more time listening, spend more time taking information in from the true boots on the ground people involved in the VEX Robotics competition. I said this yesterday. I have the unfortunate reality of, even though I get to spend so much of my time committed to the VEX Robotics competition and I live in the game manuals, I'm currently in the process of very heavily into designing the 25, 26 games. Sorry, they all blend together for me at this point. But I guess what I'm saying is, because I'm spending all this time designing, we get a little bit lost in the sauce, I guess you could say. We're trying to take it upon ourselves to try and spend more time taking this feedback in. Some of the feedback we've gotten this year at VEX World in the past couple of months, we haven't been super responsive to our gdc@vex.com email. So one of the things we're trying to do right now is be more responsive, try and get back to people if they email us. I promise you, if you send an email to this, you might not get a response the same day, you might not get a response the same week, but one of us is going to read it. One of us is going to eventually be able to get you a reply and answer your question. This is absolutely a resource I want as many people to take advantage of. It's the really easy way to get some of the more complicated questions answered, some of the questions that might be a little bit more specific to team situations that might not be applicable to everybody. Some of the more one-off situations, shoot us an email over at gdc@vex.com, involve your local REC representative, and we'll find an answer that works best for you. Because truly, at the end of the day, even though the game manual is all-encompassing, there are millions of situations involved in the VEX Robotics competition where there's never one answer. So all of these situations happen. We want to be able to provide the best experience for you guys. So if you have any issues, any feedback, any concerns, any questions, please feel free to shoot us over an email, gdc@vex.com. It drops right into my email inbox. Unfortunately, I have a pretty busy email inbox nowadays, but I promise you, if I don't get to it, somebody else on the GDC will, and we're truly trying our best to get all of this feedback documented and answer as many of your questions as possible.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us, Bailey.
Yeah,
I think it's
absolutely.
so cool, that you have been so transparent in talking with us really about what happens behind the closed door of the GDC, right?
Sure.
And what you guys all go through with that design process and that thought process, because I think a lot of people think a game just appears or someone has this crazy idea and it's a game, where it's really it is the engineering design process personified. Really, it is.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's really important that we're able to have conversations like this and be able to provide coaches, participants, students, event partners a little bit of insight into why we make some of the decisions that we make. These are the most passionate people we have in our program. They've committed their time, they're volunteering their time to these students to be able to give them positive experiences. And, I want to make sure we're enabling all of these people, and we as a GDC want to make sure we're enabling positive experiences. And when we have negative experiences, when we have situations where there's something wrong happening, we want to know about it, we want to hear about it, and we want to figure out how to make it right and make sure that these events don't happen in the future and these negative feels bad moments are minimized. I think it's important to understand that as a competition, feels bad moments or negative moments will never be eliminated, but we want to take it upon ourselves to minimize them as much as possible.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Bailey, from tonight and from our session on the VEX IQ Robotics competition. I really look forward to seeing how these two games pan out for this year and what the GDC has in store for 25-26.
I'm really excited for the Dome here in the next couple months. I'm really excited to get to show off what we've been working on at the GDC for the next couple months. Because while you guys have been so busy coaching up the kids on building their robots, we've been super busy over here at VEX spinning up the next game for you guys to coach on. So I can't wait to show it off.
All right. We'll see you in the Dome, Bailey. Take care.
Yeah, we'll see you guys. Have a good one. Good luck on your presentation too, Brandy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So now, friends, we want to talk about a little bit about strategy and how it kind of dictates your design a little bit. So, and what that really means, though, it's a process where you approach a problem. In our case, it's the game and or robot in a way that you constantly think about, does what I'm doing meet the goal that I'm actually trying to get to? As well as just having the resources you have here at your school or your private organization, the resources that you have in order to be able to play this game as successfully as possible. So that's kind of what strategy dictates design means, and Brandy's going to kind of go over that in just a little bit. Before we do, though, I do want to reiterate our student-centered policies here at the RAC Foundation. Again, like I said last night, this is one of the best things that I think our foundation does, is that we require our students, our mentors, and coaches to be a student-centered program. But we also have spent some time kind of going over our mission and our vision statement over the past couple of years. And our mission this year, not just this year, but our mission is that the Robotics Education and Competition Foundation's global mission is to provide every educator with competition, education, and workforce readiness programs to increase student engagement in science, technology, engineering, math, but also computer science. And our foundation, our vision as well, is that we see a future where every student designs and innovates as part of a team, overcomes failures, perseveres, and emerges confident in their ability to meet global challenges. And, when I was a coach and a mentor, we praised failures because that always leads to successes later on as well. What we're not here to do, as far as mentors and coaches, we are not here to be your head referee or make those decisions based on different kinds of situations. That's really an educational point for you all to kind of, talk to your students about. We're not here to dictate robot designs. Each team's goal is to measure, and measurement of success should be different. Again, we put the E emphasis in the REC Foundation where education is key. And we're also not trying to break the game each time. So always read the rules with the intention of following them and not breaking them. Again, Bailey really went over a lot of our rules and regulations, in the game manual as well. And there's a lot of constraints in there as well. So, as a mentor and a coach, you're really just to, present these students with our constraints that we have and just lead them in a discussion on how to best, the best way to kind of carry through the season to do that. But what we are here to do, our main goals is to teach that critical thinking. As a coach, the hardest part was always to try to figure out what questions can I lead my students to think about what they're really trying to get to. So you're going to use your role as a teacher or a coach to guide students through this learning process the entire time and just to give new perspectives. So what works for one will not always work for another. So if you have multiple teams throughout the season, each student is different. We know this. Each student is different. And so you're going to kind of work through those questions to help guide those students to think about what's going to work for them. And, like Bailey said, steal from the best and design the rest. So that's kind of a fun little mantra as well. Always encourage new ideas. Sometimes doing a little bit of math can help you identify a strategy that you've never considered before. So that's kind of where we are with this. So if you do have questions, and Brandy's going to present to you guys strategy dictates designs, and you're going to have a lot of questions with this. So scan this QR code, throw this into the Q&A, and we're going to talk about these in just a little bit. Brandy?
Awesome. Thanks, Pat. So as Pat said, one of the things about strategic design is it's really easy for adults to look at this and be like, oh, I know what the answer is, or I know what my student should be doing in order to play this game the best. And we need to step back and keep it student-centered, just like Pat said. But the way that I have always thought about this is I've been a coach now. This will be my 19th year of coaching. And this is a method that I learned from our strategic forefather, Karthik Kanagasabapathi. Some of you guys might know Karthik. And this is a quote that he always starts every one of his presentations with. And it's now kind of like a motto that I live by, to the fact it's literally on my office wall over here, which is, we are going to relentlessly chase perfection, knowing full well that we will not catch it because nothing is perfect. But we are going to relentlessly chase it because in the process, we will catch excellence. So our duty as coaches is to set our children up for that failure that we talked about earlier, and the fact that they will never be perfect. They may have a perfect score on their match, but it might be 1 second slower than somebody else. Or they might create a mechanism that they think is going to work perfectly the first time that they test it, but it's going to fail miserably. So our job as coaches through this process is to keep that ball rolling, to keep that encouragement going, and to consistently encourage our students to chase that excellence. So what the heck is strategic design? So you guys have heard Pat and I use the phrase strategic design. What is strategic design? It is basically deciding what you're going to do before you decide how you're going to do it. What is your strategy? What do you want your robot to do once it goes out onto the field? Whether it is in an IQ match or it is in a V5 match, what is it that your robot is going to do? And there's a whole method to be able to achieve this. You're going to start off with evaluating your resources. And actually, this is the step that most people skip. So we're going to go into this one a little bit deeper. But then understanding the game rules. We talked a lot with Bailey about understanding the game rules and why it's important to know what a robot can do, what a robot can't do, how big can a robot be, what functions can a robot have before you start building that robot. Because if you build a robot that's out of size constraints or has too many motors or has too many actuations outside of your starting configuration, then you have built an illegal robot. You can't compete with it anyway. Next, you want to look at that game manual and identify all of those scoring opportunities. We're going to go in depth into this about how you as a coach, educator, mentor can teach your students how to do a little bit of math and come up with a maximum scoring benefit opportunity for them. Then you can teach your students how to prioritize those to say, you know what, we can do anything, but we can't do everything. So what things are we going to do? We are constrained by time, by money, by our resources. So how do we prioritize what we are going to do and what we're not going to do? That's how you determine your overall strategic goal. And then you set a plan forward on how to implement it. All right, so resources. As coaches, we've got a lot on our plates. We have a lot of things that we have to keep track of, a lot of students' needs that we need to have met. But at the end of the day, it's really our job to keep that ball rolling, right? To set our time limits. How many days a week are we meeting? How many hours per day are we going to meet? What is our total build time, our total practice time, our total strategy time for our students to work together to build that robot and to build that strategy? It's an incredibly limiting factor because a team who is meeting for 20 hours a week is going to be able to build a robot a lot different than the team who's only meeting 2 hours a week. Next, it's technology access. Do you only have one programming computer for your whole entire team? And all 6 kids who want to learn how to code have to take turns on one laptop? Or are you blessed that you are in a district where every kid gets a Chromebook and they can all program simultaneously and do coding on their individual devices? Whether or not you have to take those turns and work in parallel or series makes a huge difference not only on your timeline, but the experience that your students are going to have while they're performing those tasks. Next, it's your workforce. How many students do you have? Again, going back to that, a team of 5 or 6 students is going to build the robot a lot different than a team with 1 or 2 students on it because you have more hands and many hands make light work. How many dedicated mentors or coaches do you have? Do you have someone who has knowledge in, programming or judging or design or, notebooking that can guide those students to resources and be there to help them and answer questions? Or are you one person running, 20 teams in your organization that students have to wait in line to ask you a question? All of those things do come into play. How much parent involvement do you have? Can you get parents to literally just come to meetings with you to help guide those students down the path of resources, keep them focused and remind them of their timelines? Because that can be really helpful for you. Material supply. This is something that I personally have a really strong opinion on. My teams, we don't have a huge budget for our VEX programs, and we've been doing this for a long time. We started in the VEX Robotics competition in 2013. And we are still using a lot of the same structural equipment that we got back then because we have a no cut policy on our team. You cannot cut, modify, bend, otherwise maim up any piece unless you have a CAD drawing for it. So what this does is keeps our material supply so that our pieces are reusable year after year after year. But you might have a budget where each year you can replenish those supplies, or maybe you don't. So what is that material supply that your students have available to them? If they want to use pneumatics on their robot, can you just order it for them? Or is this something that you need to think about, budget for, plan for in the future? Speaking of budgets, how much sponsorship do you have? Do you have grants from the REC Foundation that are going to help you get your equipment and pay your registration fees? Do you have a school that's willing to fund you? Do you have local businesses that are willing to help you pay? This could also be interesting for you when it comes to how many competitions are you going to? Can you afford to pay for and travel to 3, 4, 5 competitions in a season? Are you planning on attending any signature events? Will you attend your event region championship or the world championship if you qualify based on your team's budget? Those are things that you can start thinking about now at the beginning of your season instead of waiting until the day that you qualify for your event region championship and then figure out how you're going to pay for it. The next is your knowledge and skills of your students and your adults, especially when it comes to students, because this is a student-centered program. As kids graduate, they take knowledge and experience with them. So what are you as a coach doing to make sure that those students' knowledge gets passed down? Are you having your junior, and senior students mentor your new students that are coming in? Are they working side by side with each other to try to make sure that that knowledge is not lost when those students graduate? Do you have machining, fabrication knowledge on, how to properly cut metal, how to use a Dremel, how to properly assemble some different mechanisms, whether it is, the VEX IQ competition or the VEX V5 robotics competition? All of that transfer of knowledge is so important, and it is on us as coaches to ensure that that continues year after year after year, because you're the glue that keeps your teams together generation after generation. So how do we get here? All right, so each year the game changes. Unlike football and basketball and hockey and soccer, where the rules stay the same every single year and we play the game every single year in the same way, the VEX robotics competition games change every year, so we have to learn new rules every single year. The thing that we want to keep in mind is there are a couple of things. What do the rules say and what don't the rules say? The game design committee has kind of been very transparent about the fact of if the rules don't say it's illegal, then it is legal, right? They're not going to tell you your robot, has to be, or they're going to give you a maximum size for your robot, let's just say, but they're not going to say your robot may also be 16 inches or 15 inches or 14 inches or 13 inches. They're going to say your robot can be up to a certain amount. So that's kind of one of those, what do the rules say or what don't the rules say? That's kind of along the same things of what are you allowed to do and what are you prohibited from doing. So in both this year's games at the IQ level and at the VEX V5 level, there's lots of things that say, what you are explicitly allowed to do. In the V5 game, you are allowed to pick up rings and you are allowed to score them on mobile goals and you are allowed to climb up the ladder. But they also say things like you are not allowed to, just grab the high rung on the ladder and pull yourself up. There are rules in each game manual that tell you what you are allowed to do and what you aren't allowed to do. What I like to do is have my students make lists of explicitly allowed to do things and explicitly not allowed to do things. Like, what's going to get you a DQ? Let's write these things down and put them up on the wall in a place where every time somebody suggests, let's just build a 48-inch tall robot that reaches up to the top rung of the ladder, you as a coach can point that and say, is this within the rules? Think about it. The game manual is not going to give you strategic maneuvers or here's the golden key on how to win every single match. That is up to you as the students to come up with what is it that is going to win you matches if that's what your goal is. If your definition of success is to win matches, to win events, to win your event region championship, to end up on the dome floor and to win the world championship, then you're gonna want to know how to win matches. Now, maybe you're a team who's just starting out and making it to the World Championship is not your measure of success. Maybe just making it to your first event and getting your robot onto the field and having it move every single match, maybe that's your measure of success. Maybe you've been at this for a little while and you've got your eyes set on the Innovate Award because you've come up with this super cool mechanism on your robot. Those are your definitions of success, and you're not going to find those in the game manual. You're not going to get those answers from your REC Foundation Regional Support Manager. That's on you to come up with what those are. All right, so here's where we start with the entire strategic design process and everything that is going into this so far. I'm going to speak in generic terms so that you can apply this information to any game. So next year, when the new game comes out, you'll already have it in your arsenal that you can look at this method and say, oh, I can identify types of game pieces and what my access to the game pieces are, and I can break down the match and determine what my best strategy should be. So how I go about teaching this to my students is I have them get out one of those big giant white poster boards or a whiteboard, a chalkboard, or even if you use something like Google Jamboard or Miro to take notes in where you can move the notes around. Highly recommend that you organize something like that and make sure that all of the students on your team have access to the document. I know that it's easy to put one person in charge as the scribe, but if we want to make sure that all of our students have the opportunity to participate and to learn, you're going to want to make sure that they're shared on these documents. So you can get the ball rolling as a coach and kind of pose these questions. All right, let's think about game pieces. Who wants to get started? How many types of game pieces do we have? Are they all the same? Are they different? So like Pat, for example, if you were one of my students on my team and you were on the IQ team this year, I might look at you and say, all right, what kind of game pieces do we have? And how would you answer?
Yeah, like we got a ball.
Okay. A ball. That's exactly right. We have a ball. And then we say, well, how many balls do we technically have in the game?
I guess we can only have 3 total, right?
Yep. And how many can we have in play at a time?
I thought it was just 1, maybe 2.
2. Yeah, exactly. So if you don't know the answer, like if you right there were saying if a student is like, well, I think it's 2, and another student says, I think it's 3, this is a perfect opportunity to get out the game manual. To be like, all right, everybody, pull up the game manual. We're going to take a look. We're going to read and find out together how many balls are allowed on the field at any point in time. How many balls can be in play at any one point in time. And that's a really valuable exercise for your students to understand the fact that there is an answer to this question. We know where to find that answer. And I, as your coach, am not going to give it to you. I'm going to encourage you and I'm going to empower you to find that answer, but I am not going to give it to you. So the next thing you can do is talk about access to game pieces. What are the starting locations? What is the physical access restrictions? Like, do game pieces get introduced by a human player? Do they get introduced behind a wall? Do they get introduced down some kind of a chute? When they're introduced onto the field, are they in a guaranteed orientation or is it a random orientation? All of these things are important because as you're thinking about how you're going to do things, you need to develop mechanisms. But when you're thinking about what you're going to do, you just need to know where those things are, right? And kind of how they're going to be presented to you. The next is autonomous. This year, the autonomous portion is only in the VEX V5 robotics competition. There is no autonomous in VEX IQ. So if you're an IQ coach, this doesn't apply to you. But if you are that high school or middle school V5 coach, thinking about autonomous, what do you have to do to get the autonomous win point? One of the unique things about last year and this year's game manual is as the season progressed, it became harder to earn that auton win point. The game design committee has said in the game manual that the criteria for the AWP at your event region championship may be different than it is at the qualifying tournaments. So your students might look at that first version of the game manual and think that they've got it made, but then an update comes out and now things change. So I do recommend that you keep going and rereading these rules as often as you can. Now, there's 2 or 3 kind of methods that once you identify all of these things for you as coaches to kind of start planning out your season. You've got a couple of choices. You can let your students work in parallel, or you can let them work in series, or a little bit of a combination of that. But for the most part, that's going to depend, again, on those resources. Do you only have 2 students and they both build and they both code? Or do you have, one student whose specialization is building and another student whose specialization is coding? So now you're going to have them working together so that your coder learns how to build and then your builder learns how to code. So then you're working on your project in parallel. You're working on one thing. When you complete that, you move on to the next thing and move on to the next thing. The next thing that you can do when we talk about our strategies in a little bit is think about, let's master one thing before we move on to the next thing, right? So a real life example might be you should probably learn about the rules of the road before you get in a car and drive one. You should probably learn about which one is the gas pedal and which one is the brake pedal on a car before you get in a vehicle and turn the key and test a pedal to see what happens, right? So thinking about that as you're building robots, designing your strategy, and getting ready to play the games is incredibly important. All right, so what you can do next is think about calculated contribution. And if you're thinking, whoa, Brandy, we just made a huge leap and we're already talking about scoring and we haven't even talked about what kind of robot we're going to build, that's intentional. It's because the strategic design method encourages you to figure out what the maximum contribution of a single robot is and then help you decide how much of that contribution you are going to make. So it's very, very, very important for you to calculate a contribution. So the chart that we have on here right now is actually from a couple of games ago, because I don't want to show you how to score this year's game. I want you all to figure out how to score this year's game. So we could make a chart. You can use that Excel document that we talked about, or we can use that Miro board and kind of lay out things of what in the game manual is something that you can score this year. So Pat, you talked about the fact that in this year's IQ game, there's a ball. And there are multiple places on the scoring element that you can score these balls. But we don't need to give that information to her since we can have them figure it out. But now let's look at a couple of years ago. So this would be from the game with, as the community lovely called them, Ringles. I called them rings in this, but the community lovingly called them Ringles. That you had lots of places that you could score them. There's high locations, middle locations, low locations. There's neutral places. So identifying each one of those things individually is very important, because even if you aren't yourself going to complete those actions, knowing that they exist is important, because then you can anticipate those happening in a match and you can be a better alliance partner, whether you are in an IQ match or you're in a V5 match for your alliance partner. Okay. So things that you want to consider: if there are designated scoring timeframes, are there points in a match or times in a match when you can only perform certain actions? So for example, in the V5 competition, you've got that first bit of the match that is autonomous, that you can't use your driver control period or your driver control for that. So you have to be able to do things autonomously. The next thing is identifying, when you've read the game manual, how many times can you do the action? Is it limited scoring, that once the element has been put on a thing or in a thing, it has to stay there? Or can it be removed, relocated, and rescored someplace else? How many of each field game element are there? This is a very important thing for students to understand, how much each game piece or game element is worth scored in a specific location. In the past, we've seen it, this one game element, if it is scored in, position A, it's worth X number of points. Scored in position B, it's worth Y number of points. And scored in position C, it's worth Z number of points. Doing all of those permutations of math can give you a better sense of what is the most efficient return on investment for doing a specific action. The next one is, can you perform more than one action at a time? Can you design a robot that does more than one thing. When you get a multi-use mechanism, or think about performing more than one scoring action at a time, that's when your points are really going to start to increase. The next is thinking about the maximum number of points in a match and whether or not there is one. Most of the time, the matches for the VEX Robotics competition have a maximum score. That means when you're at the end of the match, you either did score or didn't score all of the game elements. That is something unique about this year's IQ game, is that has changed, and that is something that you need to take into consideration. So once you've basically figured out how many times you can do a thing and how many points each of those things is worth, you can determine how many points per second or how many points per action you can get. So this looks like a lot of math. A lot of people get really overwhelmed when they see this, especially if you're an IQ coach and you're like, my kids don't know how to do multiplication. But I see you laughing, Pat, because I know that's probably the first thing that you thought when you saw this giant chart. But you can break this down into bite-sized chunks. So Pat, you previously were an elementary education educator, correct? So could you explain a little bit how you think, obviously this could be a little bit more applicable to like middle school or high school. How could you break this down a little bit for an elementary schooler?
But even still, each game is going to be different regardless of what year you're doing it in. And so this year's game is going to be quite a bit different than last year's game. And, you know, just trying to figure out what is, you know, in my head for my students, what is the easiest thing that you could do that's going to score a point? How long is it going to take you to do that as well? So that kind of goes into your you know, spot about how long does it take? What is the percentage of those points? So I always like to start low. What's the fastest way to score points? What's the easiest way to score points? And then we start to build on that as well. So no, I think what you have here, it is quite a bit of math. However, we can adapt this to our elementary age students as well. And now that we have the end game, especially for IQ, how many points is that worth? And is it worth it? How fast can you actually score those points? You know, when you're in this end game for our IQ folks. So no, I think this is really good to be able to do. And you know, each robot's going to be different. Each team's going to be going to be different as well. So yeah, let's keep going.
And I think, you know, breaking it down one game piece at a time is good for the littler kids too, to just be like, all right, so we scored one game piece. How many points was that one game piece worth? How long did it take you? Did it take you 12 seconds to drive across the field and score that game piece? All right, so if our match is 1 minute long, how many times can we go? How many 12-second trips can we make to go back and forth to score one ball, right? And really breaking that down for your kids. And I mean, in the end all be all, multiplication is just repeated addition. So you can teach those even small kids, you know, let's just make it 1 point plus 1 point plus 1 point plus 1 point is 4 points. That's the same as telling them 4 times 1, right?
Right. That's another teaching moment for our students, regardless of what age they are, between 3rd grade and 5th grade, whatever they are. So it's, you know, there's all kinds of teaching moments within this, especially when it comes to math. And then if we start talking about autonomous mode, that's a whole different story.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would encourage you as your coach to sit down with your students and kind of come up with, in that description column, this is my made up imaginary game example with finite scoring, to sit down and look through the game manual and say, all right, what are all of the ways that you can score a point in this game? What actions can you do that will increase your score? And how many times are those things available to you? Do you have a finite number of game pieces that you're going to score? And then what are you going to, what percent of the score is that? So if you're like, what do you mean, what percent of the score? So you can basically, if you know how many game pieces there are, you know how many points they are a piece, you know what your end game bonus is and how many of those you can achieve. You can literally create a giant sum and be like, all right, in a match, you can score 120 points. And then if you say to yourself, oh, I think that, you know, making sure that I get that end game bonus, that's 40 points out of the whole 120, that's a really good thing to do, because it's worth a lot of percent of the overall points. Now, the thing to remember as coaches is just steering our students down the path of doing the thing that's worth the most percentage of the points is not always the best thing to do. Sometimes doing one action repeatedly can get you more points than that. Or maybe, what if you spent your whole entire season perfecting one part of your design and you get out there and that mechanism doesn't work? What are you going to do to score additional points? And coming up with this sum is kind of how you can make that happen. So how do you determine that what that we were talking about earlier instead of this how? For me, as a moderator on my team, and again, I coach high school, so my students are a little bit more able to be articulate in communicating these things and understand kind of the process behind it. But this is an exercise that we go through at the beginning. Before we even touch robot parts, we're going to learn that game manual. We're going to read every single line of the game manual, especially when it comes to those SG rules, those specific game rules that talk about how we're going to win matches and how we're going to earn points. So we want to think about what a robot can do. So instead of saying we're going to shoot the game piece or we're going to grab the game piece, we don't want to use words like that, because what that does is it puts a picture in a kid's brain, right? When I say I'm going to play a sport and I'm going to shoot the ball, you automatically think of basketball because that's a game where you shoot a ball. If I say I'm going to, kick the ball, you think about maybe football or soccer where you are kicking that ball. It puts a predetermined idea in their head. So instead, let's say we're going to score the ball. We're going to move the ball, because that doesn't have any kind of action associated with it. It just has the idea of that what. And same thing about grab. When you think grab, you think some kind of pincher or articulator. Instead, you might just want to say we want to manipulate the ball or we want to obtain the ball, because there's lots of ways that you can pick up a ball.
Yeah, don't forget about passing the ball.
Passing the ball, definitely. But in order to pass the ball, you have to be able to obtain the ball, right?
The rules on passing the ball.
So the thing that you want to do is come up with everything. Anything that is in the rules, if it is a minuscule thing that might either score your team points or maybe prevent, if you're on a V5 team, your opposing alliance from getting points, you want to think of that as part of your strategy. Basically, every action that you would take in a match in order to progress the match, you should record down, because no answer is a wrong answer when it comes to this. As long as it is not expressly prohibited either in the game manual or an official Q&A, you should record it. This is also one of those opportunities, like Pat, we were talking about earlier, about that opportunity for learning and recognizing students learning. When they have something to contribute and you write it on a Post-it note and you stick it up on the wall or write it on the chalkboard or put it up on that app, it makes them feel like a valuable contributing member of your team. And that's going to open that student up so that they are more likely to be a future contributor as well.
Of course, it just creates ownership of the team. It's not just the robot, it's more of the team aspect of it. So I agree.
Exactly. So my students are always completely overwhelmed when we start doing this, right? Because I'll stand up there and be like, all right, guys, so we're going to talk about strategy. We're going to identify all of the strategies that are in the game manual during gameplay. Somebody go. And they just look at you with like saucer eyes, because they're like, nobody wants to be the first person to speak up because they're afraid it's going to be wrong, right? So usually what will end up happening is I get the ball rolling and start talking with them. And then before you know it, they take off and they're doing it themselves. Students are so intelligent and they're so enthusiastic and they're so resilient. Like once they get rolling on this, it will be like second nature to them, right? So your job as a coach at that point becomes keeping the kids organized and keeping them on task. So when, somebody starts talking about, hovercrafts and, flying robots and robots that are going to jump and reach the top of the tower, you can kind of steer them back, right? And if something is missing, like they, completely forget about, scoring a ball. If they completely forget about that and they're so micro-focused on little tasks, maybe you could guide them to be like, all right, guys, let's open up that game manual again. Let's turn to the SG rules and let's walk down point by point and see what we're missing, guiding those students, right? And what you can also do is create strategy subsets. So how do you create a strategy subset? So one of the first things that you're going to want to come up with is your first ever strategy. So I'm going to teach you guys right now what the number one strategy is for any single game. And I will tell you, when you ask your students for the first time, what's the most important thing on a robotics competition? First thing someone's going to say is scoring. They're going to say the most important thing is scoring because that's how you win matches. And I say scoring is a very important part, but it's not the most important part. The most important function of a robot is to move, because it doesn't matter how good your mechanisms are or what you can do with that robot. If you can't get to the goal to score the thing, doesn't matter if you can't move. If you forget to plug in your battery and your robot can't move, or you didn't spend enough time putting together your chassis that it's strong and doesn't collapse the second you set it on the field, doesn't do you any good to have the world's best scoring mechanism, right? So those subsets of your strategy your main strategy might be move here. Then your other two subsets, Pat, as you pointed out earlier, there's lots of different kinds of movement that you can have in a drivetrain, right? You mentioned omnidirectional. You mentioned, changing out those traction wheels. So talking about those different ideas and subsets of strategies is very important for your students. So then once you've gone through the entire game manual and you have identified everything, you're going to want to reorganize them. And that's going to go back to that contribution that we talked about earlier and what your resources are. So if your student's number one priority is something that you don't have the budget for, you don't have the time to build, you don't have the knowledge or skills to be able to do it, then that might be a lower priority for you, or you need to change your resources. If, having this gigantic 6-foot-long IQ robot is your strategy and you have 15 parts available to you, you're obviously going to have to get some more parts. So either change your strategy or change your resources. So really think about, can we build what we're thinking about, or do we need to change how we're going to do it? And in order to do it, can we work in parallel or series? You as a coach might be able to teach your children on the team some project management skills that we're going to focus on moving first. I'd recommend that. When you have a moving robot, then let's move on to things like scoring or picking up game pieces or doing whatever the end game challenge is for that year. So then we're on to match play. So Pat, if you'd like to talk a little bit about this from an IQ perspective, because I've never been an IQ coach before. I've only coached V5. So if you want to talk a little bit about how an IQ team can go about planning their match to use the strategies that they've come up with.
Well, sure. But it's also going to be different based on if you're doing teamwork challenge versus your skills challenge. When it comes to match play, just for your skills challenge, I think your students need to come up with kind of a pathway of first, second, third type of tasks, your Q1, your Q2, your Q3 of tasks that's going to score them to maximize their points in order to be able to get their highest points. But they're also going to want to make sure that they practice this so that it's inside and out. And every driver has the same sort of knowledge that they can do the same sort of task in order to maximize their points. Now, when it comes to your teamwork, that's, you still, I think, are going to have your strategy, what you can do versus what you can't do. But then the entire time, though, before your match, you are strategizing with this other team. You're trying to ask questions, and as a coach, you really have no say in what you're asking with these, the other team, but you're trying to teach your kids what questions should I ask my other teammates who I don't know who they are, in order to be able to strategize to be able to maximize their score. So you're asking them, or you're trying to train them to ask them what can they do the best, what do they need to work on that's not quite successful, because even they might say this particular task is their best aspect of their game, it's going to fail eventually. So you're still working to try to help your students to ask and to ask those other teams to strategize what's going to score the most points as possible. But you still have in the back of your head, your students still have what their greatest aspect is. And so I think that, for me, that's what I have my students do. I have my students carry a folder with the actual game on there with a dry erase marker so that they can strategize with those students to be able to come up with their best possible thing. But also as a coach and a mentor, just and trying to prepare your students, just remember that it's not going to always work the way it's supposed to be, the way it's planned, and that's just the way it goes. So that's, as an IQ coach, that's what I do. And we don't really have, we do have autonomous when it comes to skills, but that's a totally different thing. But with teamwork, trying to give your students those questions to be able to ask those other teams in order to be able to strategize to the best of your ability is key as well.
Yeah. And teaching students to advocate for themselves as well, right? Like when you were talking about, like when they head to the field, taking that folder with them that says, we've built this robot with a specific strategy in mind, and we've practiced with it, and we think that this is what we can do to be a contributing member of our alliance. And then incorporating that into the whole match strategy with alliance partners can be so valuable for these students. Like, we talk so much about those soft skills that students learn as part of the VEX Robotics competition.
Right.
And it's not a joke, right? Like, and this is when, like, it can be very stressful for kids, because it's like, all of the work that they did is sitting on their shoulders, and keeping it fun for them, but also being in a perspective, getting them into a perspective to say, you've spent all of this time building this, like, go out there and get yours, right? Like, go out there and advocate for yourself. Go out there and say, the first 45 seconds of this match, we hope to be able to score 10 points. And then the next 45 seconds of the match, we want to do this thing. Here's what we're able to do at the end of the game, is so valuable for students to be able to do that. And those skills are going to carry on for them in education, when they grow up, in life, in relationships with your spouses and coworkers. Having that advocacy piece is really, really, really actually important.
Just imagine, Brandy, you go to Worlds, and I've told my kids this many a times, you're going to be partnered with students that you can't even literally speak to. And how are you going to be able to strategize with these students to be able to maximize your score? Those soft skills, and this is one of the things that is really brought me to the REC Foundation, because we are teaching these soft skills as young as second and third graders to be able to communicate with other folks to make the best out of a situation. So yeah, I get it.
Absolutely. And I think the thing that we also need to teach our kids is some of that humility, right? To go out there, and just because, when you're at your field, the only robot, or when you're at your practice facility or your school, and you're the only robot on the field, you can score all of the points. Well, that's not you having to share those game pieces with someone else, and share that field with someone else, and maybe have someone playing defense on you on purpose or accidentally to lower that score. So calculating what your contribution is for that match, and what your kind of goal actions and goal points are, and communicating that honestly with your alliance partner is incredibly, incredibly important. All right. So this has been a lot of information about, like, what coaches can do and how they can guide their students through this. But the thing that I would really encourage you as coaches to be is honest with your students, right? When it comes to those resources, when it comes to their strategy, when it comes to those things, really encourage them to be informed, encourage them to kind of dig deep into what they can and can't do and what they have the option to learn about, right? Like, the resources are out there. This community is an amazing place to be a part of. The coaches, the students, between all of the social networks that we have a lot of information to share. And we're really excited here at the REC Foundation to make sure that you as coaches have that. So now it's time to put this in action. So we came up with some of these tips for you to encourage success with your students. We're going to start off with reading the game manual. We've already kind of covered why it's important and paying attention to those red boxes and blue boxes throughout the game manual. Then I'm going to say, read the game manual again, because you're going to miss something the first time you go through that, right? You're going to be so excited to figure out what happens next and how many points each thing is worth. You're going to miss some subtle detail that really changes whether or not what you want to do is actually legal or would be beneficial.
And then having your kids take that driver certification test. I mean, that's one of the best certifications our students could take. And it kind of walks them through the game manual and quizzes them based on their, on their knowledge, kind of on some of the same level as a head referee as well, of the do's and the don'ts when it comes to the whole entire game. But again, once you're doing that, the driver certification, but also checking out the official Q&A. And our students can do this as well, but our mentors and coaches, you definitely want to go into robotevents.com and you check the official Q&A as well. And then talk to your students about some of these questions that they see. Quiz them on some of the game plays that you're reading within the game manual and or the Q&A as well, and just kind of checking out their responses.
Absolutely. And we talked earlier about that defining success is different for every single team. Like, one team might be win the world championship and one might be just to go to an event because they're brand new and got a late start and they're just happy to be there, right? But writing down what that definition of success is, you talk about, like, when you grow up, we call it a vision board, right? Writing up there what all of our goals are and our wants that we want to do. And for, us, we're just hoping to get a vacation, but these kids are hoping to walk away with a trophy, right? So that they're constantly reminded of what that definition for success is. We talked about some of those game manual updates. They're scheduled game manual updates, but you also got to watch out for those sneaky unscheduled ones. Bailey talked a little bit about that in our game design committee meeting earlier, of the fact that sometimes the GDC just finds something that is broken in the game manual and they want to fix it. So watch out for those.
No, I agree. And then, setting up and prioritizing those strategic objectives. When it comes to your robot or your students' overall aspect of competition, having those objectives laid out, what their goals are as well, and keeping those in a public place so that we can always go back to that, and just reminding them, this is our goal here. What are we doing to achieve this goal, and trying to keep on track with that as well. And again, always kind of referring back to those priorities. When you're building your robot, even in gameplay as well, just thinking about those priorities and what's going to best serve you and your team's overall goal as well. And like Brandy already has here, iterate. So even if you're building this hero bot, which is designed to be successful, yet there are some design flaws on there on purpose in order to be built upon when you come back home with this robot. Just making sure that you're always working to get better each and every time.
One of the phrases we have on our team is everything is scrap. It's just a matter of when. So whether you build this mechanism on your robot that's designed to do a certain thing and it does not work, it doesn't do what you want it to do, you have two choices at that point. You can leave it on there and have it not work, or you can scrap it. Yep. And whether you scrap it week 2 of build season where you're trying to get this robot done, or you scrap it after your first tournament when you performed really poorly, or you scrap it after the world championship because it was the best robot in the world and won the matches in the dome. That robot is scrapped because next year's game is going to be different and you're going to be building a different robot. So you may as well iterate early and just scrap it and move on. Learn something new, build something new, and commit to that continuous improvement. Because I guarantee you, if you are a team that thinks good enough is just good enough, and you're not going to go through that strategic design process, you're not going to go through that iterative design process, your students might be missing out on some really, really great learning opportunities and some really great experiences that the VEX Robotics competition offers them.
Yeah. So, that being said, our highest goal as a team is to win the Excellence Award. The REC Foundation, their highest award at any event is going to be our Excellence Award. So in order to be able to achieve this, catching that excellence, the students have a role, as well as our coaching mentors. As a mentor, we're trying to encourage our students, asking those questions that are going to lead them to help finding those answers, assisting them when they're needed. They're going to lean on you when they need to find those resources, and you sharing those knowledge and skills. And as RSMs, we're here to help provide you those knowledge and skills as well. But then, for the students itself, they need to set those goals. They need to define what success looks like to them, because it may be going to Worlds, but you know what? It may be just going to the state tournament and succeeding as well. But being that driving force of progress as well. Of course, we're going to have to make sure that their role is building the robot and documenting their process throughout the entire time. So, Brandon.
Yeah, and I mean, you as a coach, you have a lot of roles in this too. But that's kind of up to you what you want your role to be as far as when it comes to remaining student-centered, but also, like we talked about, that loss of knowledge, transfer of skills, linking the past and the present, making sure that your students who are graduating are passing on those skills, whether they're, moving up to the middle school team or moving on to college. Make sure that you're encouraging those students. Make sure that you're enabling them to do what they want on the team, what they're passionate about on the team, and giving them those learning opportunities. But also as a coach, and I think all of us are guilty of this as adults, is not enlisting help when we need it. To just say, when your student walks up to you, and guarantee you they're going to know more about building and programming than you are. Guarantee you. Like I said, I've been a coach for so long. I did not ever build a robot, turn a wrench on a robot until I started working for the REC Foundation and started teaching other adults and other students how to build robots and what those best practices were. Because I just enlisted help. Anytime a student would walk up to me and be like, "Hey, Brandy, I don't know how to do this," I'd be like, "Oh, you know who does? This kid over here. Hey, Bryce, teach this kid how to program something. Hey, Noah, teach this student how to assemble this more correctly." Enlisting the help and being okay as a coach with not knowing everything. Being able to admit, you know what? I don't know the answer to that. Let's find out together. Let's research together. Let's look at the library. Let's, check the forums. Let's look in all of these resources that we have available to us to find those answers. And then when you become the person who knows the answers, sharing it with everybody else, being that person that you needed back then, right? And then planning. I would hope that every single team has an adult who's 18 or older as their team contact, so that you can make sure that you're within our policies, but also so you can register and pay for things, so you can register and pay for events, so that you can get your registration fee paid and that kind of stuff. That's another job that you have to have an adult, one of kind of those necessary evils. So.
No, I agree, Brandy. Just remember, as a mentor, you're there to mentor. That student-centered program for us is big key. And you're just there to help find those resources. And if you don't have them, reach out to that RSM that you have in your back pocket to help you find those resources as well.
Absolutely. The RSMs are just a huge, huge, huge wealth of knowledge. So, all right. If you all have any questions, you can submit them. That is the end of our presentation. We do have the PD certificate that Emily is going to give out. So all of you guys who've stuck around here till the end, you are going to get 2 hours worth of professional development. Let me look and see if we have had any Q&As come in. All right. Got one right here. All right. My team has decided that scoring rings is the best way to go. They don't want to change their strategy. However, I'm having a hard time getting them to think about doing anything else. What's the best way to change their mindset? Well, you as a coach, it's not your job to change their mindset. It's your job as a coach to kind of open their eyes to all of the options. I would encourage you to have them do that, do the math, right? To encourage them to say, all right, well, we've thought about rings. What else is there to think about? And encourage them to go through that iterative process, that strategic identification process, and say, all right, after we've informed ourselves of everything that is available, is this still what you want to do? Do you want to keep your strategy? Do you want to keep your design, or do you want to change it? And then you as an adult be there to encourage them, to provide them with the materials and resources that they need to make that empowered decision. All right, next one. That drive team certification, where do I find it? You can actually go to the REC library. And there is the coaching certification, the drive team certification, the head referee certification, the judge advisor certification. All of those are on the REC library, but also reach out to your regional support manager, whoever it is for your region, because they'll share that resource of that drive team certification with you, with a whole other host of resources that you probably don't even know exist that would really help you as a coach and really help your students too.
Yeah, Brandy, go to library.recf.org. But when you're looking for your different levels, so if you're VEX IQ, you're going to have to click into that entry point, that VEX IQ. Or if you're V5 Robotics, you're going to click on that entry point. And then from there, there's a search bar, and you can just type in certifications, and it's going to take you to different types of certifications, especially your drive team certifications as well.
Awesome.